Hi, this is صدای دانشجو. I'm Ida.
My name is Babak.
My name is Nora.
My name is Ryan, and today's question that I present to you all is this. So, as Persian Americans, first gen, second gen, and etc., we have unique perspectives of what it's like to be Middle Eastern, white, Asian, or somewhere in between. We certainly face stereotypes of high performers and sometimes charismatic charmers with many cousins. My question to you guys is this. What do you believe is unique to the Persian American experience that other student populations or young Americans do not face? And what part of that might be due to pressure to perform? What, if any, cultural factors influence our stressors and perceptions of them? So welcome, guys, to the very first show. This is the first one we're filming in chronological order. So what do we think about that question? I know I asked that before the show, but any thoughts? Ruminating? Are we co-ruminating?
Frankly, I can start with this discussion. Honestly, I grew up in the Bay Area, I would want to say, and where I grew up, there's predominantly a lot of East Asian families, and something I'd noticed, you discussed trying to notice differences between myself and the average student. For me, usually the average student was East Asian students, and you notice a lot more similarities than differences actually in the way that they're raised versus how we were raised as Persians, I would say, or at least myself. You notice a lot of focus on making sure you want to perform and do well in school and go for really high, jobs that your parents would prefer, like being an engineer or being a doctor.
Yeah, beating around the bush. Persians, Asian cultures, it's all about a large part is the academic achievement. I don't know if there's so much of a monetary influence or like seeking monetary gain. I don't know if the cultures, maybe you guys can share this. I have my own opinions of like materialism between cultures, East Asian and Persian.
Partially maybe that, and also I'd say to think of status too. I'd say very much I've seen that families, right, they say like, oh, if your son is a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, then like your family's successful and it makes them look better. And I'd say from my experience with my friends who are East Asian, and also my Persian friends, like this very much aligns. And I'd say this is especially an idea that comes maybe from more the Middle East and East Asia, and it's kind of flowing down and taught by our parents, even though they immigrated here. At least that's my experience.
Here's a question for you guys, is how many doctors in the family, how many engineers, and how many lawyers? I'll start.
Very tough question.
Lawyers, 2. Doctors, none. Engineers, more than a handful.
Are we including extended family, like cousins?
Sure.
I don't know if I can count all of that. I can definitely.
Okay.
So I would say my dad, his 3 brothers are all doctors. His sister back in Iran is a dentist. My sister is a doctor. My brother is a lawyer. And then one of my mom's brothers is also a doctor. So lots of them in the family.
Kind of an aside, but
Yes.
how does that, if you don't mind sharing, does that reflect also on their socioeconomics? Do you see your high academic achievement family as also being financially successful? Because it doesn't always correlate.
I would
Largely
say,
it does,
yes, they are financially pretty stable, I would
smarter
say.
people.
Yes.
Yeah, in general.
Definitely. My dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, he was a principal back in Iran. So he really emphasized education. And I think that carried on into my dad and then how he raised me.
Who is this, your great-grandfather?
No,
Your
my grandfather.
Your grandfather was a principal.
My grandfather on my dad's side, yeah.
Okay.
And so I think it's definitely more than the monetary aspect, like you mentioned. Like there is, I guess, the Persian stereotype of the, BMW, Mercedes, Gucci belt.
Is it a stereotype if it's true?
But I think they definitely value the education aspect of it much more than the monetary. The materialism definitely comes with it. And
How
I think
true is that?
within my family, definitely. I'm not sure if that's...
Have you asked them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I would say the opposite is true for my
Really?
family.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think money comes first, and from their perspective, I don't want to say it is non-beneficence or something like that to people that they treat, because a lot of them, they want to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. They aspire to that. They are that. But I think it's more of just a realistic perspective. Is like we have to be real. What's one reason we're doing this is money.
Right.
And so perhaps it's just the absence of fear to address that aspect.
I would say up until the point of like, financial stability and like security that matters, but past that, it, doesn't really matter whether you're in like pediatrics, which is like, I think the lowest paid specialty versus like plastic surgery, the highest paid.
Medically centric,
They don't really value that as much as long as you have some degree of like stability.
Ida, did you have something that you were thinking about that?
Well, I agree with what Nora said, is that I think usually, our families typically want the best for us, and having that financial security is kind of what they're striving for. It's not really in a sense of material gains as much from my experience. In my family, like, education was very emphasized as being important. It will take you places, open doors, and because like having those educations is an easier way to be able to gain that financial stability. I was also wondering, you guys, my parents are immigrants, and I always had this sense of I need to be successful because they work so hard to be here. And I was wondering if you guys had like similar experiences with that or anything.
Yes.
Like that. Yeah?
Yes. When I see my father get up at 3 in the morning every day and pass out exhausted at night, that's my closest association. That's my available stereotype. So when I think of my default performance, I imagine it to be as high as the available heuristic. And I am 100% comparing myself to that. Where does that mentality come from? Maybe like a chip on your shoulder. Coming from a country where my family, for instance, came from like the Persian bourgeoisie, a little more of higher class, to then within their generation falling class status. And they needed to, and I'm sure you guys have similar experiences of maybe a loved one, family that was a doctor or something in Iran, and then they have to come over here and get their doctorate again.
That's what my dad did.
There you go. And it's just an uphill battle for immigrants. What do you guys think? So comparatively, intergenerationally.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like what you said, like my dad was an engineer in Iran, and when he came here with, 3 kids, he had to start from scratch. He ended up taking a completely different like career path, just because it was something that was in his situation beneficial given his like family and everything. So he did have to sacrifice like a lot to get here. So I do agree with that, and I do like see that.
Is every immigration story here, does it all involve an aspect of sacrifice?
Definitely. I would say similarly, I mean, my dad still is a doctor in the US, but he had...
What does he practice? I think you said this before, but...
Yeah, so back in Iran, he had done pediatrics.
Okay.
And he actually came to the US for a fellowship in neonatology, went back to Iran, practiced there for a while, and then immigrated here with 2 kids, had to redo his residency. Once he moved back, he did his residency in family medicine, and now he works in like urgent care work.
Okay.
I mean, my dad's story, he was the first person to immigrate in my family. His is kind of different. He actually came before Revolution when he was 18 years old. He wanted to kind of branch out and kind of, like, while there were still great opportunities in Iran at the time, he wanted to kind of do something different in his family and get an engineering education in the United States. And he kind of did, in a way, completely start from the beginning. A lot of his credits from schools and transfer he had to apply, and this is in the moment of like letter and mail. There weren't like online applications or a lot of calling. Like he did letter and mailed application to places, figured out a way to get settled, went to community colleges in the United States, and this is like with like the bare amount of English he was able to learn before coming, learned it all, and went through everything with like limited connections to his family except for writing letters and occasionally flying on like multiple stop flights to get back to Iran in like the early 70s, which I thought was kind of commendable and something I don't know, maybe like just my upbringing, I don't know if I could do the same as what he did, which I always think is amazing. But it is a little different in your guys' family stories.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. It seems like there's reliably in these stories an aspect of bureaucratic or cultural, with technology, gridlock, that they don't have access, of course, to the same things that we do, you know, for better or worse. Looking at you, Instagram and stuff like that. Do you think that technology affects, with regards to your family and your culture, do you think that technology affects the stresses that you feel now? Does it alleviate it? Does it add to it with regards to culture? So I know that we can extrapolate this to how do we compare ourselves to Instagram fit models and things like that, but with being Persian, I can think of a couple answers.
Well,
when you see someone posting they're sitting on their new BMW or something like that is my first thought.
Right. I think there's like pros and cons to like this new age of technology with our culture. Like again, like you said, we could see like people with BMWs posting on Instagram, but also there's like I think a new wave of like a sense of community among the group. I think like there's a lot of social media pages that focus on Persian culture, being Persian, a lot of like, for example, a lot of like chefs that are teaching new Persian cuisines and how to like make them. I think that like kind of like, for me, that makes me happy because it's like, it's information that might not have been like readily available for like back then, but now it's like with the touch of like your screen and the phone, like you can just access it really fast.
I feel like it's like a double-edged sword in a way, I would say.
Yeah.
Because I like consider my dad's situation, right? And like when he had a situation, it was just like letter and mail. And like I think of myself, let's say I was an immigrant, or not even an immigrant, but like I was, let's say, a student who was born immigrants in that period, would I have been able to be as connected to my like Iranian background other than through my parents, right? Because I can learn a lot of things online, see what people are doing, and be more close and connected. Take a Farsi class, right? Learn and improve my Farsi. But at the same time, while I can learn more, does it provide a sense of insecurity as to like what my background really is? If I wanted to be more Iranian,
You could always learn more.
I could always learn more. I see other people like engaging with the culture, learning all these things, singing songs. I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm as familiar with that, but I really feel like I am Iranian and want to be Iranian. Where do I fall there? So it's like a double-edged sword, but it's not even something you would think about as much if it weren't there in the first place. So that's why I say it like that.
I was going to say my entire TikTok For You
I'm
page
so sorry.
is all in Farsi.
Oh,
I just am constantly getting those on my feed. The algorithm loves to give them to me because
oh my goodness.
I love getting involved in the culture. I love.
This is a whole other topic. What has your algorithm, how has your algorithm assessed you, and what has it curated to your sensibilities, if you don't mind?
Oh, that's a very tough question.
What do you see when you go on TikTok?
I see a lot of different things. There's a lot of Persian poetry, and as someone who English was my first language, it really helped make my Farsi better over the past couple years that I've been getting more involved with the Iranian community and everything. But I see a lot of Persian poetry, a lot of Persian music. Dance trends that are going on in Iran that aren't in the US.
TikTok.
Yes, exactly, TikTok. And I personally think it's really helped me connect better with my culture. And I think this is an interesting thing to bring up, but like Ed Sheeran's song, Azizam, like it's interesting how now with social media, right, it means my love, it's making kind of Persian culture more mainstream in the US, which is very interesting.
I haven't noticed that. I'm largely off of social media, so kind of something to end this on is we have, you're saying, kind of intercalated ourselves into mass culture. We do still feel some of that like more stereotypical pressures of the East Asian culture and such, but we are adaptable, and that's a human characteristic. Is there anything about the student experience that you think that we can finalize this discussion on, one last thing that you really want to drive home to students about being Persian? Maybe something that, I'll start, something that has sort of gone askew in recent years is the definition of faith. You can extrapolate faith to mean a concentrated religion or a more typical religion, but let's say devoid of religious practice, having faith could be something as I know this is a whole different term for the discussion, but something as simple as having faith in yourself, having faith in your culture. I like the phrase, the kids will be all right. It means that life goes on. So while we may feel these stresses, it can be calming to some just to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and having faith in yourself, having faith in your culture and your experiences, what you learn, could help to enhance that sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's interesting point. I think like in terms like Iranians, we do have a lot of faith in our culture and where we're from, and we're like really proud of being Persian and Iranian. And obviously, like I think that culture in terms of school, being students, looks different for like a lot of people depending on where you're from. Like I was born here, but I grew up with two Persian immigrant parents, so like how does that look like compared to someone who immigrated from Iran and is starting fresh, doesn't really have like really proficient English. So like I think it might look different for certain people of different backgrounds, but overall I think I would say, if I'm like speaking for all, like we're really proud, and I think that sense of like being proud of being Persian, and that really brings in the community together. And I think like no matter like where you are in school, when you like kind of know someone else is Persian, like you kind of like nod, you have their back, and I think that's like a beautiful thing that is part of their culture.
Growing up, a lot of my friends were more American. And once I got to UCLA, which is where I went to college, I met a lot of Iranian-born immigrants who had moved here like in high school or even like at the beginning of college. And I see like their community and their ambition and their drive, and they're all such great people and they all stick together. And I think it's kind of like what Ida was saying, it's just a very beautiful thing that kind of keeps them all whole and supported.
Sure, an interesting point was made about the U.S. Census and inclusion of Iranians or people of different heritages. I know this is pertinent for Mexican cultures and the like, but adding a tab or something like that on standardized tests for Persians, or Ida, you have more about this, more knowledgeable than I am.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question that you brought up. It wasn't actually until March 2024 where Iranians, including all other Middle Eastern and North Africans, had their own ethnic group categorization in the US Census. But before that, we would just either pick white, Asian, or other.
White. We're talking about like SAT tests and things like that.
Right, this is for the US Census, so this is like, the US Census is important because it helps gather data across on a larger scale of the United States. And this data can go towards many things, such as education policies being added, social change, and like being able to, like, if we are able to be identified in the United States as our own categorization, then we're no longer in like the overpopulated large majority white. And that way there's more advocacy for our voices to be heard, and more change to be done. So a lot of research being done in population groups and psychology and biology even. Like a lot of times they'll like follow the ethnic categorization that the US Census does. So what that causes is that before 2024, that would cause like a lot of Iranians and other Middle Eastern communities to be kind of invisible in the larger set of data, which is a problem for like health disparities and things like that. But so it's great that the US Census has changed that, but oftentimes on forums, I'll still see like there's no like group for like ethnic box for me to press. I'm like, well, I don't feel white, I don't feel like Asian, I feel, Persian American, which one do I pick? So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. What are your experiences?
I mean, kind of like what Ryan was saying, like with all the standardized tests all throughout elementary school to high school, I would have to put either white or Asian or other. There was never something that felt correct. I remember asking my parents actually, and they told me to mark white, but that that never really felt right. It felt like we were kind of forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's important that those changes are being done for the sake of like improving like our society, improving research and
Yeah,
things like
you're
that.
saying it sets a big precedent for research.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there's like some studies in like specific states, specifically like Michigan, that looks at like the Middle Eastern population in research, and like they have like research studies found that
Is
there's
Michigan a large immigration center?
Michigan has a large Middle Eastern community, specifically Arabs. So like there has been studies that do come out that show like those communities face more like discrimination, more like social like injustices compared to like a non-Hispanic white community.
At some point, like that makes me think like, oh, now that we're already categorizing Middle Eastern, would it be a lot to go further, right? And say, oh, who's Persian American, Iranian American, or
That's
further?
a little much.
Yeah, I mean,
Because it's not like, there's, differences between like Mexican, El Salvadorian, Guatemalan, even though they might have different cultures. Doing it country by country might be
I mean,
a little too niche. Because where does it end? If they
Yeah.
do that
it
for,
goes
This
back to
is-
what the purpose is.
I
This
guess.
is not,
Right.
it's not death by choice, and my words are not vitriolic, but I assume we need to keep it like within appropriate confines for whatever, if we're taking an SAT, what do we define ethnography as or ethnicity as? Is it a region? Is it a way that you look, your biology? And I think, yeah, that's, you have different ideas, Ida.
Well, yeah, no, I think like for me in terms of like what ethnicity is, it's like obviously it depends like how the person individually identifies as. There's no like obviously specific look or anything like that in terms of ethnicity. I think it really comes from culture. Like what type of foods did you grow up with? Like what type of like norms and what type of like mannerisms and
It's
like,
more
what did you learn?
culturally sided than
Right.
in biology sided.
Yeah.
And also just within Iran, there are so many ethnicities. There's like Persians, Kurds,
Yeah,
Armenians.
Persian's not Iranians.
Right.
Persian is a group of Iranians.
Okay, guys. So let's say I'm born in Iran. I was born in Iran. I am Persian.
You could be, not necessarily.
Oh, look at that. But I speak Farsi.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
the vast majority, I want to say, of Iranians are Persian ethnically. And I think that's just become a generalization. A lot of people like to say that they're just Persian when they are from Iran, but they are very ethnically diverse. There's so many.
Correct way to probably say someone from Iran, if you say
It's just
Persian,
Iranian.
it's actually like not inclusive in a way. It's better. I have to try to personally say Iranian. Sometimes I forget, and a lot of people don't know. It's like, oh, Iranian is the more inclusive term of everyone who is from Iran.
I learned that just now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So technically, I'm half Kurdish.
What's the historical origins of the Kurds? Do you know?
I would not know.
What's like the division between Kurds and the Persians?
Well,
I
it
know
goes
very
back
little.
all the way to
Okay.
the Persian
Yeah.
Empire, right? And I'm not a
Yeah.
historian, but I know Persian Empire was always known to be such an inclusive empire. There were a lot of different groups that lived peacefully, coexisted actually in Iran, and that's why we have such a diverse.
Are we culturally progressive? It's in our blood.
Well,
Supposed
Cyrus
to
the
be.
Great was,
We're supposed to be.
first human rights with the Cyrus cylinder.
Really?
Yes. The
I'm
first
learning so much
documentation of
history.
human rights was in ancient Persia.
As opposed to what was going on before, which was like caste, and depending on your how wealthy you are, you're free or you're a slave.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are we all Persian? You say half Kurd, half Persian.
I'm pretty sure
Technically.
I'm completely
I
Persian.
want to say I'm complete. Now I don't know.
You have to figure
Odds
it out.
are that you're probably.
Yeah.
We started this conversation with how great it is to be Persian and also how awful it is, but now I don't even know if I'm Persian. Ida, are you Persian?
Yes.
Okay.
It looks like you're having a little crisis now.
Existential crisis. And on that note, thank you guys for watching. This is the first episode of Sadaya Dانشجو. My name is Ryan. This is Nora, Bobak, and Ida, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.